You ever have that moment like late at night um, when the house is finally quiet and your phone hopefully has been shut down, powered down, and all the noise finally stops and everything you've been running from all day suddenly shows up in your mind all at once. All of the tired and exhaustion that you've been pushing past, the worry that you keep postponing and pushing to the back of your mind, the weight that you were hoping you wouldn't have to think about until tomorrow. And then you sit there and you think, why am I so exhausted? It's the weekend after Thanksgiving. We're grateful. We are truly thankful, and we have so much to share our gratitude for. We ate well, hopefully. Hopefully we laughed, gathered. We got to see people that we love and that we care about. And yet, if we're honest, most of us just slid into that moment of gratitude just long enough to forget how tired and exhausted we really are. And now we're looking at tomorrow and thinking about how we're going to slide right back into all of the pressure, right back into all of that weight. December is now breathing down our neck. It comes tomorrow. The calendar is filling up with parties, and you're thinking about all of the gifts that you need to get for other people, and the finances are tightening up, and the expectations are rising. And this is what your reality is right now. And you're thinking about all of this, and you're thinking, if this is supposed to be something that I'm grateful for, and if this is supposed to be a season of generosity, and if this is supposed to be a season to be grateful for all of the things that we have, then why do I feel so much pressure? Somewhere beneath the gratitude and the tinsel and the spiritual language, there is this tiredness that sets in because you've been burning the candle at both ends for so long, and you're looking at this season that's supposed to be so special, but it seems to be clouded by something else. You're not coming from a place of rest. You're coming now from a place of stress, and you don't know how to undo this or how to unravel it. So let me ask it this way. When was the last time that you felt truly full? Not just busy, but full. We live in this world that equates full with filled, busy with fun. We look at exhaustion and we think to ourselves, this is a good thing. It means that I have so many things to be doing in life. And how many times does somebody come up to you and they say, hey, how are you? How are things? And your response is, well, I'm just really busy. It's a really busy season. So you filled the schedule. You tried to fill the bank account. You fill the dreams that you have, all the potential that you believe is there for your life and for the taking, but being filled is not the same thing as being full. You can fill that thing up with all of the busyness and all of the craziness and all of even many, many good things, and then look at your life and think, is this all there is? How come there's so much going on in my life and yet I don't feel full? You've tried everything. You've tried the self-help path. You've tried time blocking. You've tried, hustling your way through all of this. And then you've even read a few books that baptized it all and dressed it up in Christian language. Podcasts that promise the optimized version of your soul. And yet somehow you keep finding yourself at the beginning of each week feeling empty. Feeling like you have nothing to give, nothing left. How long are you going to keep loving from empty, serving from empty, giving from empty, parenting from empty, leading from empty? How long can you go? How long can you sustain that? Here's the tension that won't leave us alone. It will always keep nagging at us. If Jesus promised a life to the full, why do so many sincere followers of Jesus live tired, anxious, depleted, and possibly even empty lives? How do we reconcile that with who Jesus is and what Jesus came to give us? The kind of life that he told us was possible. John 10:10 says the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Jesus is speaking the language of shepherds and sheep. Danger, threat, daily survival. He's talking to people who live day to day in his culture on the edge of scarcity and fear. That's his audience. So when Jesus says that you can have life to the full, he's saying that you can have a life that is overflowing even in the world that tells you that you always need more. He means that you can have life that is overflowing, excessive, more than enough. You don't have to live from a place of scarcity. You don't have to live from a place of exhaustion. You don't have to live from a place of depletion. Not just survival or scraping by, actual, real overflow. If doing flows from being, then who you are matters more than what you do. And maybe at some point, you have to look in the mirror and say, enough is enough. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to live differently. In Genesis chapter 2, in fact, if you can, go there with me. There are Bibles all around this room. Grab one, go to Genesis chapter 2. We're right in the first 3 pages of your Bible. It's not hard to find. And right at the beginning, there is this set of verses that lays a foundation for what life was meant to be. Now, at this point in Genesis, there has been this creation narrative. And Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are really 2 different creation stories. One is the zoom out version of creation, where God creates the sun and the moon and the stars, the plants, the animals, all of these different, and then it's as if he gets to the end of the 6 days of creation. And what do you believe that God would do? Would he continue to create? Would he come up with new ideas? Would he begin to optimize all of his creation in the way that we want to optimize our lives? No, he does something very different. In Genesis 2, beginning in verse 2, it says, by the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. And so on the 7th day, he rested from all of his work. And then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, here's what's fascinating about this passage. God gets done with all of the creation. He's finished with all of his work, and then he rests. But it's an infinitive verb, meaning it doesn't stop. So the image here is that God gets to the end of all of his creation, and he doesn't just go and take a nap. He sits back, he relaxes, and he soaks it in, and it never stops. The rest is now the state of being that God is in from here forward, so that he can sit back and enjoy what he has created. Now, If you and I are made in the imago Dei, the image of God, if we are what the Hebrew Bible calls tselem, which is an image of God, it's also the same word for idol. Okay, so in the same way that in the ancient cultures, someone would have a god and then they would make a carved out idol, an image of that god. It wasn't that god, but when they would worship that idol, they would worship that idol as a representative of the real thing, right? And so they would give all of their praise and adulation to that idol. You are, according to scripture, a tselem, a idol. You are a image of God. That is what we mean when we say that you are made in the imago Dei. What that means is not that you are a God, obviously. It means that you are a walking, talking, breathing representation of your creator. And so when people look at you, they should see your creator. They should look at you and go, wow, this person makes me want to worship something. What is it? What is it about this person that makes me want to worship? What is it about this person that makes them so differently? And it is when we live out an embodied self, a person who looks and talks and is like our creator, that we actually begin to live into the image of God that he created us to be. So when we say that you are sons and daughters of the King, sons and daughters of the God Most High, you are the imago Dei. You are meant to be the image of God. This is the first time that rest appears in Scripture, in Genesis 2. Very early in our story. But it's before sin. It's before brokenness. It's before striving. It's before scarcity. It's before tiredness. It's before exhaustion. Before any of that has broken into the human story, we are introduced to rest. Rest is foundational. God doesn't rest because he's tired. He rests because he is ready to set a rhythm for us, for how we are meant to live our lives. There are 6 days of abundance and building and creating and making, and then rest. This is supposed to be what we are to live our lives out of. So the reason why I'm stopping here, it's the Thanksgiving weekend. Christmas is coming up, because if there is no other weekend to stop and think about the kind of life that we are meant to live out of rest, out of overflow, right now is the time to do it. Not after we have completely depleted ourselves 3 weeks from now, but now, where we can begin thinking about, what does the next month look like for me? How can I not just relive the same cycle of exhaustion? Humanity's first day on earth is not a work day, it's a rest day. Did you know that in the ancient scriptures, you notice that whenever it says that God created everything, it'll say, and then evening came and then morning came the first day, and then evening came and morning and the second day, and evening came and morning the third day. Why? Because in the Hebrew culture, the day began when you laid your head down at night. Their calendar was built from a place of rest. They considered their day not to start in the morning, but to start in the evening. So that every day is a reminder that we live and exist from a place of rest, never from a place of exhaustion. That is the complete antithesis of how our culture operates. We run ourselves ragged to the bone, and then we get home and we go, I'm so exhausted. I just need to rest. But that's not rest. That's not recharge. That's something else entirely. That's just a nap. That's all that is. We are meant to live differently. They begin life from fullness and not for it. Now listen to how the New Testament reflects on this rhythm. In Hebrews 4, verses 9 and 10, the author says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Sabbath is not just creation law. It is a kingdom promise to us. And you cannot work yourself into a place of rest. You cannot say, I need rest. I better work hard so that I can get my life into a place where I can rest. Our culture has it completely backwards. Spend 40 years of your life or 50 years of your life working yourself like a dog so that one day you can stop and enter into retirement and finally rest. No. You should have started 40 or 50 years earlier, establishing this as a part of your life. You cannot live from the overflow if you're constantly living out of doing and not out of being. So here it is plainly. You were never meant to live on empty. Jesus invites you to live from rest, not for rest. From rest, not for it. From fullness, not for fullness. You don't work for rest. You rest first. The kingdom does not run on burnout. It runs on trust. The remarkable thing about the Sabbath is what made the Hebrew people so different when they were in captivity to the Egyptians. And, they every week they would take a full day off. The Egyptians looked at them like, you guys are crazy. Make some bricks already. But they insisted. The whole conflict that occurred that led to them fleeing out of Egypt, the whole epic, confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh and the 10 plagues and that whole scene that we've seen epic movies made out of. You know what the entire conflict was? The whole thing that led to it. They had a festival. Every year they were to take 3 days off, go out into the desert, and basically throw a party and rest from all of their work. That was the conflict. And the Pharaoh didn't want it. He didn't want to allow them to rest. And so God brought judgment on Pharaoh and on the Egyptians and freed his people from bondage. Why? So that they could rest. They went through all of that conflict, so that they could finally live into the purpose that God had for them. They were completely different in the ancient world, where your life depended on you living and working every day from sunup to sundown so that you could put something on the table. Scarcity was the name of the game. And so for a community to say, we're not going to do that, we're going to take a full day off every single week, was completely countercultural. To say that there's going to be a day every week, not just that we rest, but that we trust, that we show what it looks like to trust God, that our future and our provision depends on Him and not on how hard we work. We think rest is the reward for finishing life well, but God presents rest as the fuel for living life well. We treat Sabbath as a luxury, but God treats it as a form of resistance. This is your subversive, countercultural move in a culture that says that you are not supposed to rest, that your whole life is based on what you do and not who you are. Sabbath is not a day off. It's a day of defiance. It defies Pharaoh's demand for endless bricks. It defies empire's demand for endless output. It defies the lie that your worth equals your productivity. Sabbath whispers to your nervous system, you are not God. You are not the provider. You are not the savior. I am. And that is not crushing, that is liberating. Some of you know my story, and some of you walked alongside my family during this story. But 2 years ago, this time, I was done. I had reached a point of total exhaustion and depletion. There was about 3 or 4 months where I would wake up in the mornings, I would take my girls to school, I would come back to the office, and I would open up my computer, and I would have all the plans and all the things that I needed to do. And next thing I knew, it was time to go pick up the girls, and somehow the fog just went through the whole day, and I had no idea. how the time had passed because I did not have the capacity to even focus. I was on the verge of daily panic attacks. My adrenals were just completely shot. I had experienced what we call compound trauma is what the therapists call it, right? Multiple things in a row that had all landed at the same time, all within a few weeks of each other that just sent me into a tailspin. And what had happened was, it's not those things that caused this burnout. They didn't cause the burnout. After a lot of reflection, I had to do a lot of reflecting. And our network was so unbelievably good because they provided for me to be able to go to some retreats just specifically for burnout restoration. And they made that happen. And I cannot, to the end of my life, I will be so forever grateful for other people's generosity that made that possible. And for some of you that stayed while you knew that your pastor was broken, that he was at the end. And after all of that, after about a year, I remember sitting down with Dr. Jean Gorman, who is she's a counselor and has written a lot on burnout. And she says, Brian, it takes about a year to recover from burnout. And when you get to the end of burnout, now I thought that I had experienced burnout. I had not experienced burnout, not until this. Then I realized what real burnout was. She says, when you get to that year mark, what we mean by recovered is about 75%. And you may never return back to 100%. Now, what I had to learn in that moment and from that whole experience, because for the first 6 months or so, all I wanted to do was get back to who I was before. I wanted to go back and become the person that I would have described myself as fast-paced, high-octane, like, let's get it done. I can work myself to the bone. I can grit my teeth and make it through, and I can do this, right? I had that kind of a mentality. Nothing's going to stop me. To suddenly, I realized that I had been stopped. Suddenly, all of my mentality of who I thought I was had been just completely obliterated. And I realized that the dream of trying to go back and become who I was before was a very, very bad dream. Had I gone back and become who I was before, I would have set myself up to do the same thing all over again. Because who I was before was living out of doing and not out of being. Who I was before was living out of exhaustion and not out of overflow. Who I was before was living out of stress and not out of rest. You know what I did for the first year? I stopped drinking caffeine, and I told people, I drink these sodas because I'm a soda-holic, right? And this is a caffeine-free soda, right? And I know. Yeah, I do. I will admit that. But I dropped caffeine, and I remember, once the panic attacks had subsided, I remember going, this is what I'm supposed to feel like? I had not realized that I had been essentially on a daily panic attack for years because I was on a caffeine drip. I didn't realize that I was stressed. I thought that was just intensity. I thought that this was just high energy. I didn't realize that I was actually completely on the verge of an implosion. And so when these multiple events happened in a row, I don't need to autopsy all of that right now or go back and litigate any of it. I was set up for it. Those did not burn me out. Those simply triggered what I was already set up to do. So I had to learn to live different. Jesus steps into history and he says something that I think almost sounds too gentle to be revolutionary, but it really is revolutionary. In Matthew 11, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Notice what he does not say. He does not say, come to me after you have fixed yourself. He does not say, come to me when you're finally strong. He says, bring your weariness to me. Bring me your exhaustion. Bring me your tiredness. Bring me all of your stress. Bring that weight that has been down on your shoulders. Bring it to me. And then Paul later tells us something that feels completely upside down. That weakness is not the enemy of power. The weakness is the stage where grace performs. And if that is true, then exhaustion is not always a sign of failure, but chronic, relentless, unexamined striving might be. Now, layer this with family. God never designed Sabbath as a solo practice. It was always communal. It was always something done. We don't think about this, but we are not in a collectivist society. We live in an individualistic society. But the Hebrew people were a collectivist bunch. The crazy thing about the English language is we lose so many of the commands in the Old Testament that were written in plural, but we don't have a plural version of you. And so every time that God is saying, you do this and you do that and you do this and you do that, you don't do this, you don't do that, he's talking to all of them. Sin and brokenness was something that they collectively took responsibility for. They never ever, if there was a poor person, they all took responsibility. It was not that person's and it wasn't this person's over here. It was all of us. If there was a person who was outcast, if there was a person who wasn't treated well, they looked at the mirror of the entire community. Households, villages, families, never individuals. And in the New Testament, the church becomes that family. The place that you are sent from, the place that you return to when you are depleted, the place where burdens are not hidden, a place where strength and weaknesses share the same table. This is why the early church was so threatening to the empire, because they lived at a different pace. They didn't live like everybody around them, with an entirely different economy, a different way of running things, a different definition of success. Not accumulation, but participation, not isolation, but interdependence, not burnout, but abiding. They depended on one another. They trusted one another in such a radical way. They gave constantly, sacrificially. They trusted God with their finances, with everything that they had, and they gave, having no idea how they would be provided for later, simply trusting that God knew better. Last week, I announced the 2552 challenge, which I was told that the logo for is really bad for dyslexics. So, yeah, sorry, I was trying to be creative. It didn't work. But when I introduced this, the way that we introduced this was, we have this dream that we believe that God has for us as a church, not as individuals, but as a family, right? For this community around us that desperately needs Jesus and needs to find a spiritual family, a spiritual home. But in order to do that, we have to reach certain milestones. We have, and one of those things is always financial, like it or not, right? You got to pay for things. That's just the world that we live in. And I know that in my upbringing, talking about money was always this like sticky subject, right? Nobody ever wanted to talk about it. Part of that was because in my upbringing, we had very little. And so we were always coming from a place of scarcity, always. That was our life, right? I can tell you some stories that some of you would relate to and others of you wouldn't. But the stories of getting a knock on the door and going to the door and there's groceries and all you see is the taillights of a car driving down the road. And that's the only thing that got us through the next week. The stories of having the power cut off or the water cut off all the time. This was normal for us. And so whenever it came to talking about money, it became something that I had so much nervousness around. I just couldn't handle it. And I had to be challenged to speak more openly when it came to church finances and talk about it, right? Talk about what we need in order to accomplish this vision, in order to accomplish this mission. And we have networks and denominations that are ready to support us in significant, huge ways. And now I've gone to them and they're ready. We have signed contracts now. Some of you that have been waiting for these, the contracts have been signed. They are in, but they have expectations. There's always strings attached. And what it mainly is they're looking at us and saying, in order for us to get behind you, we need to see that you guys are stable. We don't want to be creating the fire. We want to pour gas on the fire, right? And so this is what they're looking at. And they're saying, hey, how are you going to do this? Well, I got to thinking about what is a way that all of us can play? What is a way that all of us can get in on the game? And the 2552, this was not my idea. This is other churches have done this, other church plants mainly, who said, hey, like we talk about tithing and stuff, and we don't need to get into all of that. How do you start? How do you just get started, right? And I shared this last week. What I like to do is with my girls is sometimes when I need to get them dinner, and it's the day where I know I'm not going to be able to make it happen because I just didn't plan well or whatever, is I'll take them over to Raising Cane's and I'll get the Caniac combo and I'll split the combo with my girls. And you know how much it costs to get a Caniac combo after taxes and you throw in a kid's drink? It's about $25. Thank you, California, right? This is just, that's today, right? But like if we can go and we can get a combo meal at a fast food restaurant, right? Then what if all of us put our hands in the middle and said, go team, and we all found a way to contribute just this much? And so 2552 is saying that we would each make a commitment to give $25 a week for 52 weeks, right? If everybody in our church gave that, and I realize that there are some of us in here that might go, no, Brian, you don't realize, like, my power is shut off, right? Or I am the person asking for the groceries, right? This is where we act as family, right? This is where some of us go, you know what? Some of us aren't going to be able to do as much, and others of us are able to. Some of us can't be some of us, the very minimum is the absolute sacrifice, right? But if we were able to find 52 of us to give $25 a week for 52 weeks or 52 commitments, then we will have completely reset the stage. And so I have made a commitment to find 52 people outside of our church to also lean in and match us, okay? So last week, I gave the cards out, and those have on there, okay, if I were to grab a card and I went, okay, I feel like God is leading me, yes, those. If I said, hey, I believe that God is leading me to give $25 a week for 52 weeks, or maybe I've been praying about it, and I've thought, you know what, I want to stretch a little more, or maybe our family, we've got 4 of us, maybe we're going to do one for each of us in the family, or whatever it is, right? It's between you and God. But I said, hey, take that home and pray about it, and maybe, at any point in the next few weeks as we reach the end of the year, like, think about how you could contribute. This is above and beyond, I know, what we're already doing, because we're just trying to get it. We're trying to leapfrog our situation, right? And because what we do is we run on a deficit. That's normal for a church plant. Like, that's the stage you're in, right? We haven't actually started. And so how do we as a team kind of look at each other as a family, as a team, and do this? So last week, though, somebody already gave one. And so we've got the fancy ping pong balls. And so I get to say now, someone has already given a card, right? And so we this is the way this works. Yeah. Okay. So that's 2, 1 white, and then the red one is anything above the first one. Okay. So like they said that person said that they're going to commit to giving twice that. They're going to do $50 a week for 52 weeks. So that we get a white and a red. There's already a couple more in there that are going to be accounted for. I also met with 2 people who have been a part of past ministries that I've served in. And I reached out to, and I said, hey, let me tell you the story of what's happening in our church. And I shared with them the baptisms that we just had a couple of weeks ago, and some of the just amazing things that are happening in our church right now, and some of the stories of life change that we're experiencing. And both of those people said, I went in, and they have said that they're going to come in and match. So we're already matching, right? Yeah. So That's cool. So as this goes on, we're going to be able to watch as this grows. And if we can fill up both of those, here's what this does. I shared some of this last week. This doesn't just meet the financial need. This doesn't just make up for the deficit. It goes past the deficit. If we can do this, then we will have gone past that. We will be able to do whatever we want in the next year. We'll be able to bring on staff, people for our kids ministries. We'll be able to give budgets to all of our different ministry areas and say, hey, you don't have to be pulling out of pocket to make these things happen anymore, right? Because this is what we do. We all just sort of pitch in, right? But wouldn't it be awesome, especially for some of us that don't have as much, to be able to look at a person and say, we have a budget for that. We have that. We have the means. When a person comes to us and says, hey, I'm behind on rent, for us to be able to say, we budgeted for that so that the people in our midst and in our spiritual family will not be going without. You guys know, a lot of you know, because I will reach out sometimes and go, hey, I've got a family. And I always try to keep it confidential so that this is kind of part of our unspoken agreement as a family, right? And people lean in and people provide. And we've seen people receive meals and bags of groceries and rent money and all sorts of things because we have sacrificially given. Wouldn't it be awesome? Wouldn't it be so cool if we had a benevolence fund that was just there for those needs so that we wouldn't constantly be coming back and asking? We could just say, no, done. It's already done. Our people have spoken for that. We stepped up already. So the 2552 challenge could be monumental for us going forward. And it's a huge, huge thing for us. What it also means is that some of the networks, like Aspire Network, like the Evangelical Covenant Church, some of our friends, Proliferate Foundation, they're matching these things. So when we raise funds together, they're coming in and saying, hey, we're matching that, right? So Aspire Network has just made a commitment that beginning 2 months prior to when we launch, they're going to do 16 of these. They're going to match 16 of our 2552 challenges for 2 years, right? That's huge. And they're not the only ones, right? And so we have other conversations that are happening and stuff. It's just, God is so good. He's so good. We don't have to just clench our fists and try to run through this thing. We can come from a place of rest. So I want to ask you, what does this look like for you this week? Here are 2 invitations that I'm going to give to you. And Sarah's going to come up and we're going to close in worship. One is choose an act of Sabbath resistance this week. There's a pastor that I used to meet with as a kind of mentoring relationship. And he would walk in the room and sometimes he was a person who was constantly in meeting after meeting. And sometimes he would walk into the meeting and go, oh my gosh, I've just been late to every meeting. I'm so sorry. I need to take a Sabbath moment. And we would all just sit there awkwardly for about 5 minutes while he just closed his eyes and breathed. That was his Sabbath resistance. That was him looking at all of us and saying, I know that you have important things, but right now, rest is more important. And I'm going to refuse to just constantly keep running to the point of exhaustion. What is your act of Sabbath resistance? Maybe it's every day for 30 minutes, you're going to stop everything and you're going to spend time in silence and solitude. Maybe your act of Sabbath resistance is actually taking a Sabbath. Because I know some of you don't. Maybe it's to actually do that. But whatever it is, choose to take one action of Sabbath resistance this week. Not perfection, just one practice. Second, practice family level generosity instead of solo heroics. Meaning, instead of carrying silently, invite someone into your weakness. Choose to take the courageous act of vulnerability. Instead of grinding it out privately, let us shoulder that burden with you. Let us be your spiritual family. The kingdom moves fastest when the burdens move together and when we carry things together. Some of us, I think, we think about these things and we think, I don't have time for this. I have things to do. I'll rest when this season ends. I can't drop the load right now. I think of Martin Luther, the great reformer. who wrote in one of his journals, I have so many things to do today. And he lists off all of these tasks, all of the things. And then he says, and so therefore, I will pray all the way until noon, for there is so much to get done. What if we lived out of that place of resistance? Instead of going straight to the action, go straight to the source, to the one who gives us the rest and fills us. This is resistance and this is hope. You will fail at this. You will drift back into hustle. You will overcommit again and again. You will forget where your place of rest really is. And when you do, grace will still be sufficient. Power will still meet you in weakness. Jesus will not revoke the invitation. Rest is not a reward for the mature Christians. It is the classroom where maturity is formed. So we started earlier with that late night moment. The house is quiet, the noise is down, and the exhaustion sets in. Now imagine a different ending to that moment. Instead of collapsing alone into depletion, into personal individualistic isolation, you find yourself sinking into trust, carried, not cornered, held by your Father. This is the life that Jesus calls us to. This is the life that he calls full. Not loud, not frantic, but deep and anchored and shared. A family that rests together. A people who live from the overflow. And a church that becomes a quiet rebellion against burnout. Let me pray. Jesus, we confess in this holiday season, we are tired before it's even gotten full swing. We confess that we strive. We confess that sometimes we operate from a place of scarcity. We confess that we carry what you never asked us to. So teach us the courage of trust. Teach us the humility of rest. And teach us how to receive what we are so quick to try to earn. Make us a family where burdens move together and your grace is never theoretical. In the name of King Jesus, who always found a way to fight for rest, we pray these things. Amen.